Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. Boy, I am excited for today's show, and I'm legit excited about it. I've got my friend Scott Tips coming on, and Scott is the head of the National Health Federation. And NHF, they're like the oldest health freedom group out there. They've been around forever. They've been fighting. They're under the radar, right? You everybody knows about MAHA. They know about this, but NHF has been quietly getting things done for decades. Before anybody even knew health freedom was a thing, these guys were doing things. And so Scott's the head of this. He's an attorney and just an effective guy. They just keep getting things done, and they're consistent about it, and they're very smart about it. And so I really like this group. I really like. I had the opportunity to go speak at their conference in Dallas here. Oh, I don't know, a couple months ago, and yeah, I knew them before that. I've done a couple, web things with them and interviews with them, but I got to actually go down there. Just I can't say enough good about these guys. So Scott and NHF are into everything health, and so I'm very excited to talk to him because he's another version of me, except for more credible, more polite, and less, well, like a Viking, right? So. Very excited about this. I mean, Scott's crew, I mean, they bring credibility. They've credibly looked at things like 5G, credibly, right? Not the conspiracy theory, tinfoil hat stuff, the credible stuff. They've credibly looked at the food stuff. They've looked at the vaccines. They've looked at the big pharma and the prescriptions and the healthcare. You name it, they've had their fingers in it. And I know because when I was down there for to speak, we kind of impromptu at the last minute had me speak on a second panel that I really wasn't planning to speak on, but just because I do work like that, much like them, I kind of work anything health. So this is exciting to me, right? Because Scott and I can chat and we can go on and on and on about everything health freedom in all sorts of facets. And it's good. It's just good stuff because he's not going to give you nonsense. You're not going to get conspiracy theory. You're going to get stuff that he can back up. As attorneys, we don't have the ability to do the science, but we study the science because we have to bring it as facts in court. So when we talk about these things, we have to know our facts. We have to know our stuff. You don't have to be able to do the science to understand the science, and that's what we have to do. So when you run into a guy like Scott who spent his career doing this, it's a great thing. And NHF is actually they work globally. They actually do this all over the place in a lot of different countries, a lot of different places. So they're not only getting things done here, but they've been behind helping the health freedom fight all over the world. So I'll be very excited to introduce you guys to Scott. He's a great guy. And we'll have him on in 1 second. But before I do, I have to grift because I'm a grifter, right? And grifters got to grift. So please, we need your help. We need your support. Keep us funded. Keep us moving. Go to givesendgo.com/Renslaw. Givesendgo.com/Renslaw. Please become a monthly giver. We need people, just $20 a month. That's a Starbucks a week. Makes a world of difference for us. And we're very grateful for everybody that supports us, and we hope you'll continue to. And then also, make sure you go to TomRenz.com, www.tomrenz.com. You can't get there by typing Tom Renz. You have to go to TomRenz.com because Google does not want you to go to TomRenz.com. But go there and make sure that while you're there, you click on shop and go down to my affiliates and partners. Scroll down. Of course, we got Kirk Elliott and Satphone, but we got Dulce Sweetener, and I love this stuff. It's a low, no calorie type thing. There's no sugar. It's made with monk fruit, so it's not poison. It's a natural thing. It's healthy. It's a great sweetener. It's great in coffee. I love it in coffee, but you can do a lot of things with it. The story behind the company, you might think it's where Renz, why are you promoting a sweetener? Well, because I know the people who founded the company. They're really good people. They were in the health freedom movement. They're fighting when we're during the lockdowns for all freedom things in America. They went out on their own. They decided to start this company and to just go after it, right? To chase a dream. And they've been successful. They've got this great product now. So I'm hoping that people will take a look at Dulce Sweetener. It's delicious. A bag lasts a long time. There's a lot in there, and it doesn't take much. It's just little servings go a long ways. So great stuff. Make sure you're checking it out. Great product and good people that really deserve your support. Now, without further ado, I want to bring on my friend Scott Tips. How you doing today, Scott?
I'm doing fine.
Man, I
Thank you, Tom.
appreciate you joining us. I really do. I was I mean, I've known NHF for a long time, which, by the way, everybody, make sure that you're going to thenhf.com. That's thenhf.com. This is it. They 1955. That's even older than me, which is hard to believe. Um, yeah, my kids think I rode around on dinosaurs when I was a kid, but yeah, you guys have been around for a while. You've been doing good things all over the world, and I want people to make sure they're supporting you. TheNHF.com. So, uh, Scott, what do you make of things? I mean, we're moving into a kind of a brave new world where health, freedom, and health related issues are actually becoming a a topic of mainstream conversation, something that, I mean, frankly, for a lot of years, people had to wonder if that was ever going to happen.
You want to hear
Yeah,
something funny, Tom? So I was listening to your advertisement for that great product,
yeah,
Dulce Natural. So, National Health Federation it's an accredited INGO. That's an accredited uh, international non-governmental organization recognized by Codex Alimentarius that establishes global
yeah.
food standards. And about this time last month, I was in Seoul, Korea for the Codex Committee on Food Additives, which is hosted by the Chinese government. What they do is they establish standards for various foods. Well, one of the standards that popped up they want to create is for monk fruit
Huh.
sweetener. And so it's going to go sailing through, I can tell already. And usually, there not usually, but often enough, there's some opposition by one side or the other. But get this, the INGO that was supporting the monk fruit sweetener standard is the same organization that supports
Huh.
aspartame, Calorie Control Council. It's the one and only time in my 25 years of my going to Codex meetings that I've ever agreed, or NHF has ever agreed, with the Calorie Control Council, which is just a front
Right,
group for
right.
aspartame. But they at least have the decency and good sense to recognize a really good sweetener like monk fruit sweetener, which is what NHF supports, and
Yeah.
they push it through. So I foresee once the standard goes in place, any barriers to international trade in monk fruit sweetener are going to fall to the floor, and it's going to be able to be sold quite easily around the world,
Yeah.
as it should be, because it's a wonderful sweetener. And so I was very pleased to hear you promoting it because it's really good. Anyway,
That's
I just
actually
had to
really
share that
interesting to
with
me.
you
I mean,
before.
this is what I mean, folks. Like I said, Scott and NHF are literally into everything. But uh,
Yeah, it was funny. It was funny how that worked, but gosh, we've been such bitter enemies of the Calorie
yeah,
Control Council for so long. Although I like the people who are actually the representatives there. They're nice people. They're just promoting an
yeah,
awful, god
aspartame is
awful
awful.
product in the aspartame. And anyway, but I had to share that with you. It was an interesting meeting for several reasons. One, they were pushing not Calorie Control Council, but just Codex in general, was pushing insects as
Oh,
the new food for people. And of course, NHF had to speak out against that. We were the only ones speak out against it, as a matter of fact. And then out of 200 and plus
really?
delegates there,
All
and
the other
yeah,
crews
we
were
were the
okay
only
with
ones.
that.
Yeah, well, it's hard to say. The people at the podium, the secretariat, and the chairman or chairwoman, as the case may be, um, they tend to take a position that if you don't speak up, it means silence
Yeah,
is acceptance in their view. And I've argued this point with them for several decades. And I've said, look, silence is not acceptance. They may not have gotten instructions from their home office on this particular point, and they may not be able to speak up either yay or nay on the subject. Doesn't mean they're for it, doesn't mean they're against it. It just means they don't have a position. So you can't make this sweeping broad stroke generalization that anyone who doesn't speak up supports the passage of this standard or the adoption of the standard. And then the other problem is a lot of the people, whether they've received instructions or not, they are just too shy. Shy might not really be the word, but even afraid to speak out because there's a lot of
Yeah.
groupthink going on at these
Well,
meetings. And if you have the head science officer there for Codex speaking out and saying, this is a good product, insects are the food for the future. Oh, and Frankenstein meat that
oh yeah, that
that
stuff
you
is
grow in a
repulsive.
lab. That's I mean, this science officer was literally gushing over this new advancement and spoke on and on and on. And because we, NHF, had spoken out against it earlier, he had to thwart or try to thwart what we had said by saying, well, of course, there will be some people who, excuse me, some people who are opposed to it and are
Yeah.
afraid of this, and tried to, um,
Diminish what you had to say.
put a stand.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, the meetings can be quite interesting, um, and then other times they're incredibly boring.
Yeah.
It's like war. Long periods of boredom and then sudden excitement for 20 minutes or so or longer, and fear
Well,
for your
this is
life.
really
But
important. I want people to understand why this is so important because a lot of people that watch aren't going to understand what we're talking about here. So let me explain, folks, what's happening. So the codex that Scott's talking about, this is a group that comes together and they work to develop standards for food on a global basis, right? So in America, our food
correct.
is imported in many cases. Everybody thinks we get our food and we grow our food, but we import a ton of food. And we actually removed country of origin labeling a number of years back. So we don't, when you eat a cow, beef, whatever, you don't know where it came from. So those international standards are critical, right? So some countries may be, jabbing their meat full of mRNA or DNA, even DNA-based vaccines. That's coming out now. We have licensed in the U.S. some DNA-based vaccines for salmon. We're seeing the development and the continued push of mRNA vaccines in the U.S. They're licensed in pork and have been for a number of years. And so this sort of stuff is being put into our food supply without adequate testing, without adequate knowledge. But other countries, those standards can be even worse, even lower. And we don't know what's happening in those countries. So when Scott's talking about the Codex meetings, what he's talking about is the group of people that sit down and try and figure out what standards there's going to be for food on an international basis. And this is a huge, if you want MAHA, you've got to understand the importance of this because this is kind of the foundation upon which the global food trade is built. Yeah, I mean, yes, we have our own laws
Absolutely.
here, but we're subject to import export rules, and those import export rules, as negotiated with other countries, and this is where international law comes into play, folks. People say, "What's international law? It's not a thing." Well, it is, but it isn't, right? So you're not going to go, the U.S. We don't subject our people to International Court of Justice or anything like that. So you're not going to go to jail for something like that. But we are subject to the agreements that we're a part of around the world, and Codex is one of those standard bearers that facilitates those agreements. Am I explaining that well?
Yeah, you're explaining it perfectly, Tom. One additional bit of information is that a lot of the nation states, member states of Codex, and it represents Codex Alimentarius through its member states, probably covers 99.9% of the world's population. So, in one form or another. But anyway, the point is that I want to make is that a lot of them have agreed to harmonize, just remember that word, harmonize their domestic or national standards to those set by Codex. In fact, the FDA, in I think it was 1997 October issue of the Federal Register, put in writing that it fully intends to harmonize all of its rules and regulations to those codex standards that are adopted and pertinent to
Yeah.
the United States, which really means all food. And the other thing is, once you get a standard adopted at Codex, the reason it's so important is then through the World Trade Organization and its arbitration panels for trade disputes, you can actually shove that standard down the throats of a country that doesn't want it. And you had mentioned about the mRNA injections in animal, domestic cattle and the like, and you were dead on rights there, and that's really bad. In fact, it's worse than what I'm about to tell you, but still, we fought for years ractopamine and zilpaterol at the codex level. These are just growth enhancers. They have zero therapeutic value
Right.
for animals, none whatsoever. And in the European Union, it's absolutely forbidden to give animals intended for consumption a non therapeutic drug. It doesn't matter. It has to be for therapy only and for helping the animal and help it be healthy. And if it's not, then it's not permitted. And that's also true in Russia. It's also true in China. It's true just about everywhere except the Western Hemisphere. About every country from Canada in the north to Argentina and Chile in the south, and everywhere in between, they let it happen. And so, ractopamine, what they do is they give this in animal feed to the animals, and it makes they have more muscle mass
Yeah.
and less fat. So, it gives a leaner cut of meat, so to speak. So, it doesn't do anything to help the animals. And we fought it for years. NHF specifically cost Merck, the producer of ractopamine, millions of and zilpaterol, millions of dollars in lost sales because we blocked it at Codex
Thank
committee
God.
meetings for years. Yeah, we did, but they were able, thanks to the United States government, they were able to get around it by taking it to the highest level. See, every standard goes through an 8-step process of adoption. And once it reaches the 8th step, well, the 5th step also, but the 8th step for final adoption, it goes to the commission, which is the parent body for all these committees. And the commission, if it gets to a roadblock of you can't reach consensus, then the sponsoring country can ask for a vote. And then all it takes is, democratic rules, and takes one extra vote. And that's what they did with ractopamine. They won by one vote at the last minute and they got it passed. But for about 5 years or more, we kept it off the market, international market. If you eat bacon in the United States, there's a good bet it's got ractopamine residue in it because unlike, there's a general rule in the agriculture industry that you have to stop giving a vet drug to an animal at about 2 weeks prior to slaughter. But if you do that with ractopamine or its nasty cousin zilpaterol, which is 100 times worse than ractopamine, then if you stop that 2 weeks before slaughter, it has no effect. The meat reverts. So they have to put it in the animal feed up till the moment of slaughter, really. And so humans, you, I, everyone who eats it, will get ractopamine or zilpaterol residue. And what does this do? Well, it can make your heart beat faster. You might even think you're having a heart attack. It definitely hurts a good percentage of the animals. You get downer pigs, and they can't stand. They fall to the ground. They froth at the mouth, and animal hooves will fall off, stuff like this. And this is Tom. This is one of the things that NHF is really unique because we're the only organization at Codex uh, that argues for the animal's
What you want
welfare, for the health of the animal's welfare. Yeah, well, we give it a practical argument, which is for those who don't believe in being kind and humane to animals, which we do. But let's say that we encounter people who don't agree with that. Well, we just say you can't get healthy humans from unhealthy animals. So you have to have a mandate at Codex to have healthy animals. But a lot of the delegates say, no, no, the mandate of the Codex is just to protect the health of human
Well,
consumers. And that's
well,
what they
that's
do.
what they
That's what they
claim. I
say.
mean,
Anyway,
but
talk.
the
Yeah.
politicization is the same as we see elsewhere. So again, for anybody that's not understanding, the Codex is the equivalent of a global FDA, sort of, kind of, at least on the agricultural side and the food side and that sort of thing. So
Right.
this is important. You mentioned the pigs. You know, you can also pretty much bank on the fact that if you're eating a pig, you probably got some mRNA in it, because they're injecting that broadly at this point. I mean, it's very common in the pork supply. You know, they do have the sequivity that's been out for years and years, and it's now just commonly used throughout. They've been a little slow because when we pushed the legislation in Missouri to ban it didn't even ban it. It just required that they disclose that they're putting mRNA in our food supply and other such things, other genetic modifying drugs. That they had to disclose that. But now you mentioned the Rakuten. Does the Rakuten, now understand, folks? You're talking about something that basically it temporarily, I can't say it's a GMO because it's not permanent, but it's for the while it's there, while it's working, it's modifying how the body of the animal works in a pretty substantial way. I mean, you know,
Right.
that stuff. How does that work? Is that a hormonal, or is that a
Yeah, it's
steroid
kind of
type?
hormonal. Ractopamine's been added to the food supply in the U.S. for a long time, and Silpaterol was actually withdrawn from the market in 2015 by Merck for health reasons. I mean, actually, to their credit, Merck withdrew it, and but these products are just meant to increase the profits of the ranchers and of course the drug company that does a brisk business with it. But it just drives the body to form muscle tissue instead of fat tissue. And I, like you very nicely explained at the beginning, I don't necessarily know the mechanism by which it works, but I know it does work, and everyone's agreed upon that mechanism. So there's no
Yeah,
reason to really revisit how the mechanism works, other than it's not healthy for a large percentage of the animals, not a majority, but a
yeah.
large percentage. And we've taken the position at Codex it's not healthy for humans because it's the residual amounts that people get has never been studied in real life, in real circumstances, which is what the Codex procedural manual dictates. It says you've got to do a risk assessment of the risk of harm of any drug like this that's been given to vet drug that's been given to animals that humans then consume. You've got to do it in real life circumstances. Well, what's a real life circumstance? Some virgin person who the only bad thing they're eating is
No.
ractopamine? No, we're getting inundated with all sorts of toxins, drugs, endocrine disruptive chemicals, EMF fields, all sorts of things like that. And I've said this to Codex several times on behalf of NHF. I've said, look, you've never done a real life risk assessment on this, so you cannot push it and adopt a standard for it that allows worldwide sales, global
But this
sales.
is what they do, and this is one of the most foundational tricks. And you and I have seen this a lot. The most foundational trick used by the regulators to facilitate the success of the drug companies and these other companies that are doing this is they don't test things, right? It's kind of, pharma does this in a
Mhm.
million different ways. They just don't test it, because if you don't ask, they don't have to tell you. So they'll see plenty of signal. It's like the mRNA vaccines when they came out. You know that they
Right.
purposely did not properly monitor for side effects and safety. I mean, well, we actually know that they did, but they pretended that they didn't. They lied about that. Um,
Yeah, that's
but we
right.
have the documents showing that they did. But the thing about it is that they claimed that they didn't monitor it. That way, when you requested a FOIA, or you requested this, you requested that, they could say, "Well, we just don't know. We didn't study it." But this is the trick.
Mhm.
They know their products aren't safe. They know that there's this issue or that issue. The manufacturers know that. The regulators know that. Everybody knows it. But instead of running the risk of having to pull a product off the market, they just don't study it because it would be to take Al Gore's phrase, an
Yeah.
inconvenient truth.
Right, right. They can just shove it in the closet and forget about it and ignore that risk or potential risk, as the case may
Yeah,
be.
well, and this is
Very true.
the result has been disastrous. This is the reason that we have so many, and yeah, not just food, right? Because NHF doesn't just that you guys aren't exclusive to food. Your health generally, anything you guys get into it all, but it's the same thing
Right,
that
right.
occurs in the pharmaceutical world. Now we're talking about pharmaceuticals for animals, but they do the same thing for humans. And in fact, a lot of the pharmaceuticals that you get as a human are, they're tested or developed on the veterinary side and then end up after a certain amount of because it's easier to get them approved on the veterinary side. So there are a number of drugs that were developed on the veterinary side that then were translated to the human side. Yeah,
True. With ivermectin.
yeah,
Ivermectin was one of
yeah.
those.
Well, it's not always bad either, right? So I mean, sometimes that works great.
Well, right. In this case, it
Yeah,
was quite good. And the FDA, it's really funny. The same people who were pushing ractopamine and zilpadrol at the Codex meetings during the scamdemic, they were very vocal about telling the other delegates, you cannot use ivermectin for
yeah,
human use. You can, and actually the FDA approved it for
yeah,
human use. So that was a lie
yeah.
from the pit of hell.
Well, so I actually just was doing some work on this in the last couple days, and it was interesting because, if you look at the early parts of COVID 2020, 2021, they had a couple studies came out
Mhm.
and they were BS studies designed to try and discredit HCQ and ivermectin. And they were structured that way. Like if you looked at the
Mhm.
studies,
Right.
there were tons of issues, sample sizes, how the samples were picked. I mean, oh
Right.
yeah.
The dosage level, they like badly overdosed people and said, look,
Yeah,
it's
well, they
causing
did the one
harm.
study. I think the scientists were actually, I don't know whether they were put in jail, but they were criminally investigated because they OD'd people on hydroxychloroquine to such an extent that it caused heart
That's it.
attacks.
Yeah. That's the one I
Yeah, well,
was
they
thinking
also, in
of.
some of the
Yeah.
ivermectin studies, they were using too low of a dose. They used, I mean, they used
Mhm.
doses that were way too low, wouldn't do anything. Uh,
Oh, right. On ivermectin, that's true. They undercut the
Then
dose
they
level.
were also
Mhm.
across the board. One of the things that we saw was there was another issue that was pretty foundational because they would, when they were drawing their samples on these studies, one of the things that they were doing is if
Mhm.
you remember early on, they changed the diagnostic criteria for COVID. So anyone that had a PCR test, ran at 40 plus cycles, was called a COVID case. Anybody that, and early
Mhm.
on, anybody that was in a place, a physical geographical location where there was, ongoing transmission of COVID, which was everywhere, and had, a symptom like what was called could be
Mhm.
classified as a COVID case. So if you coughed, you could be called a COVID case. So what would happen then is they would call people a COVID case, and some people were included in the studies that really we don't even know if they had COVID. I mean, these studies were trash from
Right.
beginning to end because the diagnostic criteria for calling someone a COVID case, there's no way to test to see whether ivermectin, HEQ, or anything else works if the disease that you're testing for doesn't even
Mhm.
exist, right? I mean, if
Right.
you're saying everybody's
No.
got COVID, and these are people who don't, maybe they've got the flu or something that looks like it. So it was a disaster.
Yeah. It was also murky and squishy. You could, yeah, I remember that very well in the beginning. And, NHF was one of the first to announce to the public that this was there's
Yeah,
nothing to worry about. In fact, that was our winter issue 2019. Our magazine came out, the winter issue 2019, and said, don't worry about this COVID thing. The risk of dying from it is
yeah,
infinitesimally small. Now, the risk of you dying from the hospital
Yeah.
protocol is quite high.
Yeah.
But but dying from COVID itself, unless you have a pre-existing or a comorbidity, you're going to get through it, even if you're over the age of 65. And certainly if you're a child or an infant, those persons were practically
Yeah.
immune to it. So, but the whole thing just is so irritating. I wrote an article on this, and this was where is it? Yeah, and I called it. It's in our magazine, Health Freedom News, and I just said chimpanzees with machine
That's about what it
guns,
was. That's
and
about what it was.
yeah, and that's what. Yeah, you had these idiots running around playing God. They're like it's like handing a machine gun to a
Yeah.
chimpanzee. They're they're idiots studying to be morons and not really succeeding even
Yeah.
at that. And they're doing this to humanity, and they cause millions of lives to be lost and millions more to be disabled, and there's no accountability for what they did. Even now we aren't holding them accountable, and we need to, or it's going to happen again. We've got to, as they say, break the pattern before the pattern breaks us. And if we don't hold them accountable, it's going to
Well,
happen again.
100%. And, I mean, you mentioned the hospital protocols. And let's look at just the absurdity of that. Now, I would argue that those protocols were designed to kill people. And let me explain that. I mean, that's a very bold statement, right? But let's think about this.
Mm-hmm.
You go into the hospital with a respiratory issue. The first thing they do is they give you midlazepam, which is a drug known to depress respiration. Well, what happens when you depress respiration? Your oxygen levels fall. If your oxygen levels are already low because you know that you have a respiratory disease, that's gonna make them go potentially dangerously low. Now, this is an old drug. It's been out forever.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone knew that this drug does that. Everybody knew you don't give a respiratory depressant to someone with a respiratory disease. That's just something you don't do. But in COVID, they were giving it. It's like candy. It's like you walk in the door and you get it. Well, what happened then? Well,
Right.
as your O2 numbers dropped, they said you need forced air. Well, forced air means the hospital gets more money, right? So they give the hospital more money for forced
Mm-hmm.
air. There were incentives for it. And then what did the hospital do with the forced air? Well, there's very distinct standards for forced air. And if you run forced air too high for too long, too much volume, too much history, it causes lung damage. Well, you've already got midlazepam and a respiratory disease causing problems with your lungs. Then you blast your lungs with far too much air. Well, guess what happens? You now have three things doing damage to your lungs. And naturally, the next step is the vent, which the hospital gets more money for. Meanwhile, you've probably been given remdesivir, which causes organ damage on a catastrophic level. You get your remdesivir, your organs are shutting down. You see the creatinine problems and all the problems with your kidneys, all the everything's shutting down because that's what remdesivir does. And the hospital gets more money. And then you go on the vent and the hospital gets more money. Well, then they run the vent too high. Now, venting someone is a dangerous proposition for a healthy person. It's always dangerous. There's a risk of secondary infection. There's if you run it too high, but they ran the vents too high and too long. And there are credible studies showing they knew they were running them too high, too long. Everybody knew this. This is established science. It was old science. They knew it when they were doing it. Guess what happens? The vents do more damage. Well, at that point, along with their midlazepam and everything else, they put you on hospice. And guess what? Hospice leads to end of life, where they were frequently ODing you or mixing end of life drugs with other drugs that had known interactions, known reactions. And so you then died. And guess what else? The hospital got another bonus. I would argue that these protocols, every step of the way, They knew that these protocols were dangerous. They knew that they could cause problems. They knew that there were issues with every single step, and yet they were implemented on a national scale, which, by the way, prevents anyone from suing for malpractice, because the standard for malpractice is what would a like
There's
doctor do in a similar geographic location. So you have a scheme
that's right.
where it was rolled out by Fauci and crew to increase the death numbers so they could try and convince, but you weren't dying from COVID. You were being murdered in the hospital because they were
Mhm.
doing a series of things that they knew were wrong. I miss anything there?
Nope, you said it perfectly, and it actually brings home some memories of a dear friend of mine who was murdered in the hospital just that way.
I lost a few people that meant the world to me, and I will tell you that
Mhm.
early on, I didn't realize, so I started out, and I've talked about this, Scott, in 2019, I still thought vaccines were great, and there's nothing wrong with pharma. I was red pilled hard,
Mhm.
hard during COVID as I was doing my
Mm.
litigation, my research, because I just had a problem with them locking me in my house. Hell no, you ain't gonna lock me in my house. So as I start researching, why am I
Right.
being locked in my house and how do I stop that? I start seeing all the lies, all the
Mhm.
things that you guys have known for 50 years. So
Mhm.
I had a very, it was a personal, it was a huge shift for me. And yeah, I didn't, and I got to tell you, I carry some serious PTSD with me for all the people that I couldn't help, that I couldn't save, the people that I lost. Everybody,
Right.
just on a very personal level, I'll tell you that it's difficult because everybody thought that oh, you're the guy that's fighting COVID, you're the man, you're this, right? And I get all these accolades, all this praise, but there were so many that died and I couldn't save, and it was so heartbreaking. And then when I
Mm.
lost a few people real close to me early
Mhm.
on, and I didn't realize about the protocols at that point. It took a while before I understood the hospital murder protocols. I was still going through this red pill
Right.
process, and I was at that point I was trying to figure out about the vaccines, which I knew were bad at that point, but I didn't. I was still trying to figure out the what's, the whys in the house, and get the word out and how do I fight this. And the murder protocols were something I just didn't realize were severe at that point. We're talking early 2021, and but I eventually became red pilled to the whole thing, and I can tell you, and I'm curious just what thoughts you have when I say this, but to my mind, every single aspect of COVID, I can make a very, very strong argument, and I can put out there based on facts that I can cite, and that it was intentional. It was built intentionally. I think it was released
Mhm.
intentionally. The
Mhm.
vaccines were built years before they claimed. Those were put out there. It
Yep.
was The hospital protocols were designed to kill, not save. The diagnostic criteria was designed to
Mhm.
increase death counts so that people could be afraid. The studies done on the ivermectin, the HEQ, these other products were done in a way to diminish them so that they could get approval or at least authorization for these mRNA poisons. This whole thing was one of the most complex, well engineered schemes in the history of mankind. And we're now still living with, and
Mhm.
will be living with for generations, the birth defects, the dropping and declining fertility rates, the genetic damage, all the issues that came from these mRNA poisons that they made billions and billions of dollars off of at the expense of humanity. Uh, what do you think about all that?
Well, first of all, I couldn't have said it better myself, Tom. I think you said it exactly right. I think it was deliberate, and I think it was, done by homicidal psychopaths, frankly. And you never want to take advice on health advice from someone who wants to depopulate the world like Bill Gates does. And yet, a lot of people were following his advice. There were so many people. It was really sad to see so many people defending
Yeah.
these vaccines during the same time that it was causing them harm. And they didn't even realize it. That actually, the deaths are tragic enough, but to add to it that these people really did it to themselves in many respects because they believed the mainstream media and what they were saying. They believed these experts and authorities in power, and yet they were betrayed.
Well, and that was the foundation of it. And that's where guys like you come into play. I mean, groups like you, and I've said this a million times. I was able to do some really cool things with the COVID fight. Um, I stood on the shoulders of giants, right? You guys were doing this way before. My research hit everything. I was all over the place looking, trying to figure out how to fight. My dear friend and our mutual friend, Sherry Tenpenny, um, Bobby
Mm,
Kennedy, all these
right,
people, NHF
right,
being, since 55, all these different groups that were there. It was, but for the work, the tireless, thankless work, the years and years and years that you guys stood strong despite being called conspiracy theorists, despite being told you weren't credible. But for that, we wouldn't have had the knowledge base or the ability or even anyone to ask when guys like me had to fight back during COVID. I mean, we've got to give respect and thanks where it's due. And groups like NHF have been building credible arguments and credible bodies of evidence that could be used for decades. And you were doing it in a time when nobody was like, because MAHA didn't exist 10 years ago. 10 years ago, if you were anti-vax, you were a nutbag, except for you weren't.
right.
You weren't.
That's right.
So, I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's something that I really, every time I get the opportunity to speak on this, and I think I do an okay job of talking about it, but I always think to myself how lucky I am that and I'm going to go down to Miami here later this week. I'm going to be speaking at Charlie Ward's event, which should be a big event, by the way. Anybody watching, if you're interested, make sure you check it out. We're going to speak down there. I'm going to try and bring some. I'm trying to bring some fire on this, but every time I do that, every time I get the opportunity to do something, I'm always grateful because it's like, I'm kind of an upstart in this world. I thought it was all crazy, for a lot of
Mm.
years. I thought I was red pilled, man. I listened to Rush Limbaugh. I so I want to bring up one that's controversial, right? I got a controversial one, and it's controversial
Okay.
until it isn't. Now I'm going to tell everybody a little story they may not know. When I was growing up, my dad had a little communications company. He did RF engineering and radio towers and radio system design, things like that. So when I was a kid, Dad used to have me climb his towers. I had the big, tall radio towers you see all over the place. Well, I was the guy that used to climb those and pull the cables up and hang the antennas, and and I worked in that world, right? And so I knew, because of course, if you have a lot of OSHA standards and a lot of this standard and a lot of that standard. And I knew, that and of course, climbing a tower, you have that, but you also had these standards related to RF exposure. There were standards related to RF exposure. You had to be careful. You didn't have too much exposure. And I will tell you, if you climbed a tower and the antenna was turned on, it was still plugged in, they'd say it's hot. The reason they'd say it was hot is if you grabbed it, it would literally burn your hand. It would blister it. Now that's because
Mm.
RF energy is energy. It's honestly the frequency, the same frequency is used in certain communication standards is used in your microwave. So
Mm.
this is in the air. One of the areas that I was really impressed when I was down in Dallas with you guys was the fact that you talked about now everybody says 5G. It's not 5G that's the issue. It's the exposure to RF energy. 5G is just a communication standard.
Mhm.
The thing that everybody should be worried about is how much energy is coming off all of these cell phones, all of these cell phone towers, and how much that's exposing your body's being exposed to that. You guys
Mhm.
talked about
That's
that as
right.
an issue, and it's something that you guys have done. And as with everything else you've done credibly. Now, I know it's an issue because, again, they wouldn't have RF exposure standards for people that climb radio towers if it wasn't a real thing. So, talk to me a little bit about that. You guys have. I mean, it's certainly something you're aware of, and you guys are looking at a little bit. What are you seeing with that, with the RF exposure?
Well, they're trying to really build this digital prison, and the RF exposure is all part and parcel of it. And they even have legislation in place to have it in the national parks, to have it everywhere, to do away with the local ordinances that people have enacted to protect themselves from having it in schoolyards, right next
Yeah.
outside your window of an apartment complex, or on top of your building, and be inundated, blanketed with these uh, really horrible electromagnetic fields that are not healthy for humans to exist in. And already we see plant die off, we see insect die off, and the like. And so, one of the things that we've done, this really thanks to our NHF lobbyist, Charles Froman, is we've taken a quite aggressive stance in Congress to defeat these bills that want to do away with local ordinances and the like that protect people. And of course, we want to do more. But right now, we're fighting at kind of a defensive action right now to stop these bills from being passed. So, if you go to our website, thenhf.com, and you go to campaigns and you click on the drop down menu, you'll see some of these campaigns. Especially the EMF field ones there. And our lobbyist has been quite good and vocal about pushing in Washington and elsewhere our anti-EMF campaigns. You know, there's the flip side of the coin too, Tom, which I'm sure you're well aware of, and that is there's the good electromagnetic energy, and that comes from grounding. And I think what was it, Clint Ober, who was a big proponent of grounding and just making sure you take your shoes, socks off. Well, certainly your shoes, especially if they're synthetic materials, and put your feet on the ground for, at least 30 minutes every day and get that electromagnetic energy coming up into your body to support your health. And sit outdoors in the sun with and get energy, the good energy in your eyes, through your eyes and the like. And we've written a lot about that in the magazine, our journal, in the past. But it's the flip side of the coin, and people need to be aware that they can do things to with electromagnetic energy to help their health, and that's one of them. But on the other side, the bad side of the coin, we're having a big battle, and it's not just one bill. There are multiple bills out there that have to be dealt with and defeated. Some support, but most of them we have to
Well, I
defeat.
will tell you that it's interesting because when a guy like you, and I'm with you on this. So we talk about the need to sit in the sun with our feet on the ground, and producer
Mhm.
Andrea here frequently talks about that stuff. She'll scold me about that stuff. But one of my good friends, he's a very close friend to me, and he's a brilliant naturopathic doctor. His name is Ed Group. Do you know Ed?
The
He
name sounds
he
familiar, but
he
no,
runs
I
Global
can't say that
Healing.
I do.
They're huge, and
Mm.
we sell them. They're actually one of the best supplement company. I think they have the best supplements on the market.
Oh, oh
Yeah,
yeah, Global Healing. I saw their
yeah,
products
they're
somewhere.
very
I'm not
good.
sure.
Ed sources everything. I
Mm.
mean, like he's just super careful. It's some of the best stuff ever. But I will tell you that. So
Mm.
Ed is, I joke he's kind of got this hippie streak going on, and I'm not. I may or may not. I don't know if everybody thinks of me as a hippie, but probably not. But anyway, so Ed and I are having
Mm.
conversations. I'll tell you, I had a major. Ed and I spent a couple hours talking this week, and he convinced me to try a couple of his therapies, a couple of his things that I got to be honest, in a billion years I never thought I would try. If you would have came to me with some of these ideas 5 years ago, I'd have been like, "You're a nutbag. Get the heck away from me." But I've become over
Mm.
time, I really, in just in the last, probably in the last 6 months more so than ever, I've come around to the
Mhm.
hippie side of thinking. And the reason for that is there's so much truth and the science is catching up. We're finding there's so much truth to some of the ability of some of the natural healing and some of the natural solutions out there. You know, we talk about the RF
Mhm.
exposure. Well, you're right. You're right. Take your shoes off and stand in the grass.
Mhm.
That'll take care of it. It goes away
Mhm.
because you're grounded, literally.
Mhm.
You know, I mean,
Mhm.
things like being in the sun, experiencing the air. And that's why, you know, my dream
Mhm.
here, I got to be honest, my personal dream in life is to have a cabin on the side of a mountain somewhere, a ranch or something, you know, uh,
Yeah.
and be able to be like a normal human being. But um, when we talk about that, when we look at these things, it's crazy to me. It's crazy to see how many different things
Mhm.
that from the natural world that are really very, very, very incredibly useful and helpful. In fact, I've got a
Mhm.
study that Ed sent me that I got to read on some natural interventions that I think are kind of insane, but that I they probably work great
Yeah,
because this guy is never wrong. I mean, Ed is one of the most
I
he
see.
just
So what's an example of one of those natural
well,
interventions
I
that
got to be honest. The first time I actually I have a grounding mat now, and I do the grounding. I did not.
Oh, yeah.
If you would have told me ground,
Mhm.
I mean, it just seemed kind of like out there. And there's more. I mean,
Mhm.
you know, Ed has been involved with everything out there. Ed's got some real far out stuff you know that he swears by. He's a fan of the urine therapy. He swears by that. Um,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know people who swear by that. I'm sorry, I can't get
I,
past that one, but,
I
no matter how
Um,
healthy it might
yeah,
be, but,
there's people who are I mean there's some of the herbs and some of the different things that he promotes. You know, just the and then the way that they create
mhm,
them. But it's really been impressive to me. And I'll tell you, I use his products. And I'm not like I wasn't trying to advertise it for him
mhm,
today, although I'm happy to promote him. He go to tomrenz.com/affiliates. I mean, it's there. But
mhm, right.
um, it's just really good stuff. But that natural that natural thing, man. When we don't screw with nature, things seem to be pretty good, don't? I mean, that's kind of
Yeah, well, we have to think of it, the nature and the economy have very similar, um, connections in a way. Like we our kind of people are the people who are in favor of organic food, right?
right,
They're in favor of foods that don't have a lot of artificial sweeteners or any
right.
artificial sweeteners for that matter, that sort of thing. We're more interested in organic. And it'd be insane for anyone to think that to control nature, the synthetic control of nature is better than what nature itself can do, what nature herself can do. And it's the same thing with the free market. And I make this analogy sometimes, and the free market is the same way. It's organic. It's a million trillion interactions every day that no one could
No,
ever keep up with. Just the pricing mechanism alone, there's no way you can really keep up with it. And you could get a whole panel of Einsteins and they couldn't control the economy the same way they couldn't tell every flower to blossom, to every plant to take root, to you just don't
yeah.
control that. It's organic, it's free flowing, it's free acting, and it's the same thing with the free market. So I don't understand these people who they're all gung ho on organic and all of that. But when it comes to the economy, all of a sudden, you have to have some
Yeah,
people in charge to tell everything where to invest your money, where to buy this, where to
always
buy that.
control.
It's insane. Yeah, Ludwig von Mises once said that in his book Socialism, which I have an autographed copy from him, by the way, but because I met him when I was 18 years old. But his philosophy about socialism was, once it succeeds completely, it will
That's
fail
true.
completely.
Every time.
And I remember asking him why, although it's in the book, of course, but he said because they have no pricing mechanism. You can't tell how to price anything because there's no
Oh,
voluntary exchange of, you know, like you saying, Scott, I want to buy 10 copies of your book. How much are they for? Well, Tom, since you're buying 10 copies, you get 25% off or what. These are things that happen as we've been having this podcast. There have probably been a billion transactions. Who can
yeah.
control that? Even artificial intelligence couldn't
Well,
control
they're
it.
going to try,
And
though.
so, yet these people think they're going to try. You're right. But so these people who think, oh, we have to have the government control all these economic activities, they're just asking for trouble. The Soviet Union, when it existed, had no way to tell how much a refrigerator, for example, to charge the consumer, the Russian consumer, for a refrigerator. So you know what they did? They went to America and they got a Sears Roebuck and Company catalog, and they looked up refrigerators in America are sold for this. Let's do the exchange rate. Okay, here's our price in the Soviet Union for this. This is what they did year after year after year to set prices because they
Yeah.
had no way to know. And when you can't set prices, you have no way to rationally allocate scarce economic resources. So you have a lot of money going in to have pink umbrellas, and then no one buys pink umbrellas because they all want black umbrellas. It's this kind of thing. And so you have to have a free market system, an organic system, a system of voluntary exchanges to have it work rationally and have it work effectively over time. And the more you get government involved trying to interject itself in there, you're going to screw things up. The exact same way that's happened with nature. The more we've gone in and tried to apply pesticides, I'm sorry, there's no such thing as a pesticide,
Yeah.
insecticide, because a pesticide implies it just kills pests. No, it
Yeah.
kills all insects. It'll kill the good ones with the bad ones. So if you apply insecticides and things like that, then you're just going to screw things up. But if you actually use the word husband, if you husband your crops and your animals in tune with nature, you'll succeed and you'll produce healthier human beings, a healthier planet,
Yeah.
healthier animals, of course, healthier plants and the like. And there's a whole way to do this with regenerative
Yeah.
agriculture and all of that, and no-till agriculture and the like. So we just need to keep that in mind, this perspective that these are kind of twin systems operating here: economically, the free market, and organically, the
I think
nature.
that's a
At least that's
I
my
think that's a great
philosophy.
parallel, and I think that's a great thing. And we're coming up on the end of the show. So I want to remind everybody, of course, go to tomrenz.com and getsendgo.com/renslaw. But today, make sure you're going to thenhf.com, thenhf.com. Support these guys. They're great people, great people. They might even let me do some work with them someday. I don't know. We'll see. We're gonna ask them real nice.
You better
Uh,
believe it. We're gonna drag you down there to help us.
well, I really,
So
I really I
if you don't
appreciate it,
mind.
Scott. I appreciate all that you do. And everybody, make sure you're supporting these guys, thenhf.com. Thanks, you guys, for listening.